Commander Jake "Tank" Morrison stood in the center of the Galactic Council's grand chamber, looking about as impressed as a man watching paint dry in zero gravity. The massive crystalline dome stretched overhead, filled with floating platforms where various alien species sat in judgment of him. He'd seen more intimidating setups at county fairs. Chairman Vextar, a purple blob with too many eyes and an inflated sense of importance, pulsed dramatically as he read the charges. Commander Morrison, you stand accused of excessive military effectiveness, intimidation of allied species through superior tactical prowess, and making our security forces look like amateur hour. Tank scratched his chin. So basically, I'm too good at my job? Silence, Judge Quillnox screeched from her perch, her bird-like features ruffling with indignation. Your human arrogance knows no bounds. Actually, I think you'll find human arrogance knows plenty of bounds. We just choose to ignore most of them. Prosecutor Zeblick slithered forward, his snake-like form coiling with righteous fury. Exhibit A, Operation Starfall. You defeated an entire Zephyrian fleet with 3 damaged cruisers and a mining vessel. In my defense, the mining vessel had really good ramming capabilities. Exhibit B, the Siege of Proxima Station. You held off a 6-month blockade with a skeleton crew and expired rations. Have you ever tried military rations past their expiration date? Death becomes a viable alternative pretty quickly. Chairman Vexistar's multiple eyes narrowed simultaneously, which was honestly impressive from a coordination standpoint. Your flippant attitude only proves our point. Humans are a dangerous influence on galactic stability. Tank shrugged. Sorry, we forgot to lose gracefully. The council chamber erupted in alien chittering, screeching, and what sounded like someone gargling marbles. Judge Quillnox hammered her gavel, which was apparently just a smaller version of herself. Order! This council finds Commander Morrison guilty on all charges. Shocking development, Tank muttered. The sentence, Chairman Vextar announced with theatrical gravity, is death by execution. As is tradition, the condemned may choose their executioner from among their own species. Tank glanced around the human delegation section, wondering who'd volunteer for this particular honor. Most of his colleagues were pointedly avoiding eye contact, which was understandable. Executing your commanding officer wasn't exactly a resume builder. That's when she stepped forward. Drill Sergeant Betty Bulldozer Rodriguez rose from her seat in the human section with the kind of fluid precision that made Tank's stomach drop faster than a broken elevator. She was built like a brick fortress and had the personality to match. Her steel-gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun that could probably stop small arms fire. I volunteer, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with the authority of a divine commandment. The aliens fell silent. Even Chairman Vextar's excessive eyeballs seemed to dial back their intensity. Betty had that effect on people. And apparently on gelatinous purple blobs, too. She marched to the center of the chamber, stopped precisely 3 feet from Tank, and snapped off a salute that would have made a statue weep with patriotic fervor. Sir. Tank returned the salute, trying to keep his expression neutral. Sergeant Rodriguez. Oh, this was rich. Of all the people in the galaxy who could have volunteered to kill him, it had to be the woman who'd spent 12 weeks of basic training convincing him that death might be preferable to another day of her tender mercies. Betty Rodriguez was the human equivalent of a natural disaster, if natural disasters wore combat boots and had strong opinions about proper push-up form. She'd made his life a living hell during basic training, woke him up at 4 a.m. for motivational discussions about his posture, made him scrub latrines with a toothbrush because his boot laces weren't regulation perfect. The woman once made him do jumping jacks in the rain for 2 hours because he'd smiled at the wrong moment during inspection, and now she wanted to execute him. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a combat knife. Excellent, Chairman Vextar burbled, his gelatinous form jiggling with excitement. A human executing a human. This will send the perfect message to Earth about the consequences of military overachievement. Betty's expression remained carved from granite. When and where, sir? Tomorrow at dawn, Galactic Standard Time, the ceremonial chamber will be prepared. Vextar's eyes swiveled toward Tank with malicious glee. Perhaps knowing that one of your own will end your life will finally humble that insufferable human pride. Tank looked at Betty, searching her face for any hint of emotion. She stared back with all the warmth of a glacier in a snowstorm. Her dark eyes revealed nothing, which was exactly what he'd expect from the woman who'd once convinced half his platoon that she could read minds just by staring at them long enough. "Any last requests, Morrison?" Judge Quillnox squawked with barely contained glee. "Yeah. Can I get a different executioner? Maybe someone who doesn't know exactly how many ways there are to kill a man with a spoon?" Betty's mouth twitched slightly. It might have been the beginning of a smile, or she might have been calculating which spoon would be most effective. "The choice has been made," Chairman Vextar declared. "Guards, escort the prisoner to his cell. Sergeant Rodriguez, report to Warden Globitz for preparation protocols." As the alien guards approached, Tank caught Betty's eye one more time. She gave him the slightest nod, the kind of microscopic gesture that probably meant nothing to anyone else but had Tank's mind racing with possibilities. Maybe there was more to this than met the eye. Or maybe Betty Rodriguez just really wanted to kill him after all these years. Either way, tomorrow was going to be interesting. The holding cell was about what Tank expected from alien prison architecture. All gleaming metal and uncomfortable angles, designed by beings who clearly didn't understand human ergonomics. He'd been sitting on the bench that passed for furniture for about 3 hours when Betty arrived, flanked by 2 nervous-looking alien guards who seemed convinced she might explode at any moment. 10 minutes, squeaked one of the guards, a trembling blue creature that looked like a cross between a jellyfish and an accountant. Betty nodded curtly. "Dismissed." The guards exchanged glances. "But protocol states that—" "I said dismissed, soldier." Betty's voice carried the kind of authority that made mountains reconsider their position on being tall. The guards couldn't retreat fast enough. Tank leaned back against the wall, studying her. "So, come to gloat? Come to talk?" Betty remained standing, her posture perfect as always. "You look like hell, Morrison. Prison food doesn't agree with me. Though honestly, neither did your cooking during field exercises. My field rations built character. Your field rations built intestinal fortitude. There's a difference." Betty's mouth twitched again, that same microscopic almost smile. "You always were a smart mouth. And you always were a hard ass. Funny how some things never change." Tank stood up, matching her stance. "So what's the play here, Sergeant? Are we doing this thing or are we doing this thing?" "Oh, we're doing this thing." Betty's voice was steady as bedrock. "Question is whether you trust me enough to do it right." Tank studied her face, looking for tells. Betty Rodriguez had exactly 2 expressions, mildly annoyed and preparing for war. Right now, she was somewhere in between. Define right. "You remember what I used to tell your sorry excuse for a platoon during demolitions training? That we were idiots who couldn't blow up a balloon without written instructions?" Before that, Tank thought back to those sweltering afternoons on the practice range, Betty screaming instructions while they fumbled with explosives. "Always have an exit strategy." "Always have an exit strategy," she confirmed. Before Tank could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Betty's expression shifted instantly back to regulation stone face as Warden Globitz waddled into view. The alien looked like someone had crossed a toad with middle management, and the result had been extremely disappointed with its career choices. "Ah, Sergeant Rodriguez," Globitz wheezed, his bulbous eyes blinking in sequence. "I trust you find our facilities adequate for tomorrow's proceedings." "I'll need to inspect the execution chamber," Betty said. "Equipment check. Protocol demands it." Of course, human military precision, yes? Very impressive. Very thorough." Globitz rubbed his hands together with a wet, squelching sound. "The chairman is most pleased that a human will conduct the execution. Sends the proper message about Earth's submission to galactic authority." Betty's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "About that. I'll need complete access to the chamber. No guards, no observers. The ritual requires privacy." "Ritual?" Globitz's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, how delightfully primitive. Yes, whatever your barbaric customs require." Tank bit back a snort. If Globitz thought human military customs were barbaric, he clearly hadn't spent much time studying galactic history. Half these council species had traditions that made medieval torture look like a spa day. 1 hour before dawn, Betty continued, "Just me and the prisoner. It's a matter of honor." "Honor, yes, so wonderfully antiquated, consider it arranged." Globitz turned to Tank with what might have been sympathy if toads were capable of complex emotions. "Your species' loyalty is touching, human. Even in death, your own will observe proper ceremony." Tank nodded gravely. "We're funny that way." After Globitz waddled away, Betty lingered for a moment. She glanced around the cell, her sharp eyes cataloging every detail. "Get some sleep, Morrison. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Rodriguez." Tank's voice stopped her at the threshold. "Thanks. For volunteering, I mean. Better you than some alien who doesn't know the difference between a clean kill and a messy one." Betty's expression softened for just a fraction of a second. "Don't thank me yet, Commander. We're not done dancing." And with that cryptic comment, she was gone, leaving Tank alone with his thoughts and the growing suspicion that tomorrow's execution was going to be anything but routine. Dawn came with all the fanfare aliens could muster, which was considerable. The ceremonial chamber had been decked out like a cross between a Roman Colosseum and a Vegas stage show, complete with floating platforms for spectators and holographic displays, broadcasting the proceedings across the galaxy. Tank stood on the raised platform at the center, hands bound behind his back, watching the various alien dignitaries file in with their popcorn equivalents. "Magnificent turnout," Chairman Vextar burbled from his premium viewing spot. "Representatives from 47 systems have come to witness human justice in action." Tank scanned the crowd. Half the Galactic Council was there, along with military attachés, diplomatic observers, and what appeared to be alien reporters with way too many cameras. It was like a cosmic press conference where he was the entertainment. Betty entered the chamber with military precision, her dress uniform immaculate, her expression carved from stone. She carried a standard-issue plasma rifle, the kind of weapon that could punch holes through starship hulls. Definitely overkill for one human, but aliens did love their drama. She marched to the platform, stopped exactly 6 feet from Tank, and rendered a salute that would have made recruiting posters weep. "Commander Morrison." "Sergeant Rodriguez." Tank returned the salute as best he could with his hands bound. "Hell of a morning for it." "Any morning's a good morning for duty, sir." The alien crowd murmured appreciatively. They were eating this up like it was dinner theater. Betty turned to face the assembled dignitaries. "Before I carry out this sentence, I want to say something about military honor and the bonds between soldiers." Oh, great, Tank thought. A speech. Betty giving speeches was like watching a volcano recite poetry. Technically possible, but probably ending in destruction. "Commander Morrison and I have served together for 15 years, Betty began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "In that time, I've watched him lead men and women into impossible situations and bring them home alive. I've seen him sacrifice his own safety for his troops, his own comfort for their welfare, his own glory for their success." The aliens were hanging on every word. Even Vextar had stopped jiggling with excitement to listen. "So when this council speaks of human arrogance, of our dangerous influence on galactic stability, I want you to understand something." Betty's voice grew harder, more dangerous. "You're absolutely right." Tank's eyebrows shot up. Where was she going with this? "Humans are dangerous," Betty continued, raising the plasma rifle. "We're dangerous because we don't abandon our own. We're dangerous because we don't surrender when the odds are impossible. And we're dangerous because we never ever forget our friends." She spun around and fired, but not at Tank. The plasma bolt struck the execution platform's control panel, sending sparks and smoke billowing across the chamber. Emergency klaxons began wailing as the platform's restraint systems failed, freeing Tank's hands. "What is the meaning of this?" Chairman Vextar screeched, his purple form rippling with outrage. "The meaning," Betty said, tossing Tank a sidearm from her belt, "is that you idiots just learned why humans are so dangerous." All hell broke loose. Alien security forces scrambled for weapons while Betty and Tank took cover behind the smoking remains of the execution platform. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as the chamber erupted into chaos. "I take it this was your exit strategy?" Tank shouted over the weapons fire. "Phase 1, Betty replied, calmly returning fire at a group of guards trying to flank them. "Phase 2 involves not dying horribly. I love a plan with achievable goals." More security forces poured into the chamber, but Tank was noticing something interesting. For all their advanced technology and superior numbers, the aliens were terrible at small unit tactics. They bunched up, they telegraphed their movements, and they had absolutely no concept of crossfire discipline. "These guys fight like they learned tactics from a holovid," Tank observed, dropping 2 guards with precise shots. "Worse," Betty replied, reloading with practiced efficiency. "At least holovid heroes have dramatic timing." Chairman Vextar was screaming orders from his platform, but the security forces seemed more interested in not getting shot than following his commands. Judge Quillnox had taken cover behind her podium and was making noises like a broken smoke detector. "Time to go," Betty said, pulling out what looked suspiciously like a military-grade breaching charge. "Hope you remember your 0G training." She slapped the charge against the chamber's outer wall and activated the timer. 5 seconds. Hope everyone said their prayers. The explosion blew a hole in the chamber wall large enough to drive a hover tank through, and suddenly everyone was dealing with rapid decompression. Emergency force fields snapped into place, but not before half the alien spectators got sucked toward the breach like cosmic lint. Betty grabbed Tank's arm and they dove through the hole, landing in the space station's maintenance corridors. Tank's ears were ringing, but he was alive, armed, and no longer scheduled for execution. All things considered, it was shaping up to be a pretty good morning. The maintenance corridors of the space station were a maze of pipes, conduits, and passages that seemed designed by committee and built by the lowest bidder. Tank and Betty moved through them like they were born for it, their military training kicking in despite the chaos behind them. "Left here," Betty whispered, checking a small device that definitely wasn't standard issue. "Hangar bays 3 levels down." "You've been planning this for a while," Tank observed, following her through a ventilation shaft that was definitely not meant for human-sized beings. "Ever since you got arrested, did you really think Earth Command was going to let the Council execute their best field commander over hurt feelings?" They dropped into another corridor, this one filled with the sound of alien security forces running around like headless chickens. Through the walls they could hear Warden Globitz shouting contradictory orders in what sounded like several languages simultaneously. "Contact teams 7 through 15. No, wait, teams 3 through 9. Someone find out what teams we have." Tank shook his head. How did these people conquer half the galaxy? "Overwhelming numbers and superior technology," Betty replied, checking around a corner. "Unfortunately for them, they never learned to fight smart. They moved deeper into the station, avoiding the main corridors where security teams were conducting what could charitably be called a search, and could more accurately be called organized pandemonium. The aliens had numbers, but they were searching the wrong areas, looking in the wrong directions, and generally approaching the problem like they'd learned military tactics from a children's picture book. 2 guards ahead," Betty whispered, pulling out a stun grenade. "Ready?" Tank nodded. Betty lobbed the grenade around the corner, and the subsequent flash and bang were followed by the sound of 2 very confused aliens hitting the deck. They stepped over the unconscious guards and continued toward the hangar. "So what's the real story here?" Tank asked as they navigated another maintenance shaft. "And don't tell me this is just about military loyalty." Betty was quiet for a moment. "Remember that deep cover mission you were running before your arrest? The one where you infiltrated the hegemony supply lines? The one where I spent 6 months pretending to be a cargo hauler while gathering intelligence on their fleet movements? Yeah, I remember. Worst food in the galaxy, and that's saying something. That intelligence you gathered identified the location of their main shipyard. Earth Command used it to plan Operation Sledgehammer." Tank stopped moving. "Sledgehammer went forward?" 3 days ago, 47 capital ships destroyed, their entire production capacity crippled. The war's effectively over, Morrison. Earth won. The implications hit Tank like a plasma bolt to the chest. So my arrest, this trial, The execution order? All cover to extract you from deep cover without blowing your identity. If we'd just pulled you out normally, the hegemony would have figured out how we got our intelligence. Betty's grin was sharp enough to cut steel. Instead, they think you got arrested for being too good at conventional warfare. Your real mission stays secret. They reached the hangar bay access, and Betty produced another device that made the security lock open like it was happy to see her. The hangar was dimly lit, but Tank could make out a sleek human frigate sitting in the middle of the bay, surrounded by confused alien mechanics who were apparently trying to figure out what it was doing there. "How long has that ship been here?" Tank asked. "About 36 hours. Amazing what you can accomplish with forged diplomatic credentials and a really convincing story about routine maintenance." The hangar erupted into activity as security forces finally figured out where their escaped prisoners had gone. Plasma bolts started flying as Betty and Tank sprinted toward their escape ship, the alien guards finally showing some competence now that their targets were in the open. The ship's loading ramp dropped as they approached, revealing 3 more human soldiers in full combat gear. Tank recognized Sergeant Major Williams, Corporal Jackson, and Private Martinez from the 14th Recon. "About time you two showed up," Williams shouted over the weapons fire. "We've got company coming from all directions." They dove up the ramp as more security forces poured into the hangar bay. The ship's engines were already spinning up, and Tank could feel the deck vibrating under his feet as they prepared for departure. "Punch it," Betty yelled to the pilot. The frigate shot out of the hangar bay like a bullet from a gun, leaving behind a very surprised alien security force and one extremely angry Chairman Vextar, who was probably going to need some serious therapy after this. Tank strapped himself into a seat as the ship accelerated away from the station. Through the viewport, he could see other alien vessels trying to pursue them, but human military technology had a few advantages that the Council hadn't quite figured out yet. Like the fact that their ship could outrun and outmaneuver anything the aliens had in their immediate area. "So," Tank said to Betty as the space station dwindled behind them, "was I ever actually in danger of being executed?" Betty considered this seriously. "Well, if my plan had failed, you'd definitely be dead right now." "Comforting. I aim to please, sir." 3 hours later, they were safely in hyperspace and Tank was finally getting the full briefing. The ship's small conference room felt cramped compared to the alien council chamber, but it was infinitely more comfortable. Betty sat across from him, having shed her formal uniform for standard fatigues, looking more like the drill sergeant he remembered, and less like an executioner. "All right, Rodriguez," Tank said, accepting a cup of coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of alien substitute. "I need the real story. From the beginning." Betty leaned back in her chair, finally allowing herself to relax. "Your arrest was genuine. The Council really did want you dead, and they really were planning to execute you. But Earth Command saw an opportunity. To extract me while maintaining my cover." "Exactly. Your intelligence about hegemony supply lines was too valuable to compromise, but you'd been deep cover for too long. Another few months and you'd have been burned anyway." She sipped her coffee, making a face. "Ship's coffee is still terrible, by the way. Some things never change. So Earth Command arranged for you to volunteer as my executioner. They asked for volunteers from people who knew you well enough to make it believable. I was the obvious choice." Tank raised an eyebrow. "Because you hate me?" Betty laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her in years. "Morrison, you magnificent idiot. I don't hate you. I never hated you. You made my life hell during basic training. I made your life hell because you had potential and you were wasting it. You were smart, you were brave, but you were also cocky and undisciplined. Left alone, you would have gotten yourself and your squad killed in your first engagement." Tank considered this, thinking back to those brutal weeks of training. So the extra PT, the midnight inspections, the creative punishments, were designed to break down your ego and build up your competence. Same thing I did with every recruit who showed promise. Betty's expression softened slightly. The difference was most recruits broke and rebuilt themselves in a few weeks. You took the entire training cycle, stubborn bastard. I prefer creatively resistant to authority. You prefer being a pain in the ass, but you became a damn good officer. Betty stood up, moving to the viewport where stars streaked past in hyperspace. When I heard the council wanted to execute you, I knew there had to be more to the story. When Earth Command confirmed it was connected to your deep cover mission, volunteering became a no-brainer. Tank joined her at the viewport, still processing everything. So this whole elaborate rescue operation, the months of planning, the risk to your career, you did all that for someone you spent 12 weeks making miserable? I did it for someone who spent 12 weeks proving he could handle anything I threw at him and come back stronger. Betty turned to face him, her expression serious. That trial back there? The council calling you dangerous? They weren't wrong, Morrison. You are dangerous. All humans are dangerous, but you specifically are dangerous because you never give up, and you never abandon your people. Speaking of which, Tank said, how exactly did you arrange all this? The ship, the extraction team, the perfect timing? Betty's grin returned, sharp and predatory. You think I've been sitting behind a desk for the past 15 years? I've been running Black Ops, Morrison. The kind of missions that don't appear in any official records. This was just another day at the office. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Too late for that. But fortunately for you, I'm on humanity's side, and that includes keeping our best field commanders alive. She paused, looking thoughtful. Besides, someone has to keep you humble. The ship's intercom crackled to life. Attention passengers, this is your captain speaking. We'll be arriving at Earth in approximately 6 hours. Coffee's still terrible, but the view's about to get a lot better. Tank settled back into his chair, finally allowing himself to relax for the first time in months. So what happens now? Back to regular duty? For me, probably. For you? Betty shrugged. That's above my pay grade. But I'm guessing Earth Command has plans for someone with your particular skill set. And the council? They're not going to just forget about this. Betty's laugh was cold enough to freeze helium. The council just learned that humans don't abandon their own, that our military is more capable than they thought, and that underestimating us has consequences. I think they'll be too busy reassessing their position to cause immediate trouble. Tank nodded, looking out at the stars. You know, Rodriguez, for someone who used to wake me up at 4 a.m. for push-up competitions, you turned out to be pretty good at this rescue business. For someone who used to whine about proper bootlace tension, you turned out to be worth rescuing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching hyperspace flow past the viewport. Finally, Tank spoke up. Hey, Betty? Yeah? Thanks. For volunteering, for the rescue, for everything. Betty Rodriguez, the woman who'd made his basic training a living hell and then risked everything to save his life, gave him the same look she'd given him 15 years ago when he'd finally managed to meet her impossible standards. Don't mention it, Morrison. Just try not to get captured by any more galactic councils. I'm getting too old for this dramatic rescue nonsense. Tank grinned. No promises, Sergeant, no promises. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere behind them, the Galactic Council was probably having a very uncomfortable conversation about the tactical implications of underestimating human stubbornness. It was, Tank reflected, shaping up to be a pretty good day after all. Good.